the population of Ukraine disappears, evaporates, leaves. Metaphor or medical genocide. For more than 25 years, the population of Ukraine has been declining, in recent years, by almost 200,000 a year. In short, there is depopulation, in other words, the creeping extinction of the population of Ukraine. Reuters. Yoshino Alexander Karpets. For RIA Novosti Ukraine, every year the population of Ukraine decreases by about 200,000 people. If it goes on like this, soon the population of our country will have to be entered into the Red Book. The reason is the reduction in the birth rate and the increase in mortality for both socio-economic reasons and the disgusting state of healthcare, which is falling apart literally in front of the authorities talking about reforms. There is a growing suspicion that the goal is being pursued. If not completely destroying the population of Ukraine, then significantly reducing its number in order to free up living space and reduce social spending. RIA Novosti Ukraine, YouTube. Reform of the Ministry of Health. There will be neither doctors nor nurses in the country. Expert. We grow old, get sick, die out. According to the Ministry of Justice, in 2016 Ukraine died by 184.3 thousand more than was born. In addition, the birth rate is steadily declining in Ukraine, and this trend has occurred in recent decades, which threatens the physical extinction of the population of Ukraine. For example, compared to the previous year, 14.9 thousand fewer babies were born. In 2016, 399.3 thousand were born, whereas in 2015 the number of children born reached 414.2 thousand. However, in 2016, compared to 2015, the death rate somewhat decreased by 11.6 thousand. If in 2016 583.6 thousand people died, in 2015, 595.3 thousand people died. In general, over the course of several decades, Ukraine has maintained an extremely negative tendency towards a reduction in the population. According to the State Statistics Service, only in the distant 1990, the number of newborns exceeded the number of deaths by 27.6 thousand people. Then the death rate again surpassed the birth rate. The highest rates of population decline occurred in 1995 to 2005. And the peak was observed in 2000, when the death rate exceeded the birth rate by 373,000 people. Then the decline in the population began to decline, and in recent years it has fluctuated at the level of 150 to 180,000 people per year. Thus, over a quarter of a century, the population of Ukraine has been declining, in recent years, by almost 200,000 a year. In short, there is depopulation, in other words, the creeping extinction of the population of Ukraine. First of all, this is due to the low birth rate. Director of the Institute of Demography and Social Studies, Turkey of the National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine, Ella Libanova, in her comments in the media explains it this way. In order for the generation of children to replace the generation of parents, taking into account the infant mortality, 100 women must give birth to 213 to 155 children. And most families must have 3 children. There were 108 children for 100 women, the peak of the lowest birth rate. With favorable circumstances, we can expect some growth, say 170 to 180 children for 100 women in 10 to 15 years. But not more. RIA News. Alexei Panov. Go to Photobank from Odessa. For health anywhere, but not in the Ministry of Health. Thus, one should not expect population growth due to an increase in the birth rate in the foreseeable future. The maximum that can be expected is a certain increase in the birth rate and, accordingly, a reduction in the rate of population decline. The reasons lie in the steadily worsening socio-economic problems, but not only in them. It is obvious that war, economic crisis, galloping inflation, depreciation of income, unemployment, general instability and hopelessness in the country naturally lead to a drop in the birth rate. Equally problematic are social and psychological attitudes in society. Indeed, in the so-called developed and very wealthy, at least in comparison with Ukraine, countries, primarily in Europe, there is exactly the same decline in the birth rate and the aging of the population. The place of those who are not born is actively occupied by migrants, mainly from Asia and Africa, which causes well-known interethnic, ethno-confessional, socio-economic, ultimately, political conflicts. In this sense, the poverty of Ukraine is paradoxically its salvation. Since we do not have such an influx of migrants, who, if they come to Ukraine, are mainly to cross further to the developed West. As for the decline in birth rates due to the socio-psychological conditions in society, the demographer Ella Libanova describes this problem in such a way. Young families have a high level of education, access to modern contraception, focus on high standards of child development and themselves formed in 1 to 2 children families. Such couples will not give birth en masse. Speaking of ways to increase the birth rate, Libanova suggests indirect cash benefits are possible, for example, the repayment by the state of a loan taken by the family for housing, or the development of a kindergarten system for children up to 3 years. Development of forms of employment aimed at parents of young children, not only mothers, but also fathers. With all due respect to a well-known demographer, such measures seem very doubtful in terms of achieving their goal, that is, increasing the birth rate in Ukraine. Attempts to stimulate the birth rate with very substantial cash payments already took place in Ukraine in the 2000s, but did not lead to anything good. All of these soft loans for housing in the real conditions of modern Ukraine either do not work or end with abuses and corruption scandals. In general, whatever the payments to newborns in depreciating hryvnia and what schemes of lending to family housing would be devised by officials, primarily to fill their pockets. All this is nonsense against the background of a steadily deteriorating social-economic situation, the ongoing war, the robbery of the country by the government and the oligarchs, the general hopelessness and the futility of being in Ukraine. Focus Glusman, honest people from the Ministry of Health are a real threat. Reforms lead to destruction. Obviously. Besides the fall in the birth rate, the second most important factor in the reduction of the population is the increasing mortality. And we're talking about mortality not only among the elderly, but also among relatively young, 50-year-olds, and often 40 and even 30-year-olds, who, as they say, still live and live. Recently, this problem has found a new sound in connection with the so-called healthcare reforms, as well as the complete and final collapse of this sphere at the moment. It is mortality, especially mortality among a relatively young and able-bodied population, is the most blatant phenomenon, the responsibility for which is borne by the ruling oligarchic elite and the system of social relations in general in the country. In the media, there are already apocalyptic prophecies that 32 or even 24 million citizens will soon remain in Ukraine. And although such forecasts seem too exaggerated so far, the general trend is becoming increasingly gloomy and threatening for the existence of the Ukrainian nation as such. A number of politicians are using the current situation for PR purposes. For example, the leader of the Batkish China Party, Yulia Tymoshenko, declares, by the way, quite reasonably, that a genocide of the Ukrainian people is taking place in the country, and the oligarchs are carrying out a cleansing of Ukraine from Ukrainians. However, the national artist of Ukraine Nina Matvienko, who is very far from politics and public relations, expresses in approximately the same vein. She called on Ukrainian citizens to change their mind, since the oligarchs are carrying out a real genocide of the Ukrainian people. But perhaps most shocking are the revelations of doctors poured on the internet. We have nothing to treat people, and the government is doing everything so that we don't have anything to treat people for. This is a nation's genocide, not a reform. These testimonials are worth it, to quote some of them, while preserving the style. The situation in hospitals is on the verge of a catastrophe. The doctors themselves say that the genocide has nothing to do with the reforms, says the operating gynecologist from Lusk City Hospital No. 2 in a comment for one of the internet publications. According to her, 25 hryvnia per month, and all the necessary medicines must be purchased by the patients themselves even during the operation, since there are virtually no medicines in the hospital. What did you want? What kind of high-quality medicine for 25 hryvnia per month you wanted to hear for a patient who has no money? They are sick. Further, who have money, the situation is less. We have to send relatives for drugs and medicines during the operation. Sometimes they even have to wait until the relatives buy these medicines, because there are no drugs from the state at all. People complain that we are such, that we are Sochi, and we have nothing to do with it. There is nothing to treat. The genocide is in a country called reforms. Nothing is reformed. Everything, absolutely everything, is done so that the patient was treated. Nothing, says Dr. Lyudmila Kozas, RIA Novosti's channel on YouTube. Markovich. Medicine in Ukraine is on the verge of total destruction. One of the patients who were operated on in Lusk City Hospital No. 2 told that even diapers and bandages need to be bought, but have not yet been bought or taken from a neighbor in bed. Either you are waiting. The easiest operation on the female line pulled at 35,000 hryvnia. Absolutely everything is paid. There is nothing free. Even if you want to wash yourself in normal conditions and, excuse me, poop, pay the nurse to take you to the sweeper for the medical staff. I am lucky I had. But women who did not have this money were straining at me from the pain. They had to, as in the Middle Ages, make pains, until pain naturally heals everything, or until someone regrets and helps. One woman from the village passed out from the pain, so the whole department collected money for medicines for her. Nobody says anything about the conditions at all, just to find the money for medicines. Many make out loans and frankly cry. How to live further, how to repay the loan. If every month you need to throw out almost the entire salary on a communal flat and on children, they sit and cry, and 6 months back to the operating table, for they save as much as they can by buying only the most necessary things, says one of the patients. Obviously, under these conditions, a jump in mortality is inevitable, and this is the most important reason for reducing the population. About reforms. As part of the so-called medical reform, hospitals and other medical institutions throughout the country are being closed down. For example, they recently protested in Kharkov, blocking the road of national importance. Earlier, they protested in Vinnytsia region, where thousands of people promised to demolish power if the hospitals were closed. In turn, doctors say, everything is done to cure people. It was impossible for people to rebel against doctors, to pit patients against doctors, and doctors against patients. Those who have been dealing with hospitals lately can unconditionally confirm these shocking facts that resemble the real genocide of Ukrainians in the 21st century. All this very much resembles the sweeping of the territory of Ukraine from those extra population. The most curious thing is that practically everyone is objectively interested in this, both the Western friends, and the Eastern brothers, and, most importantly, the national oligarchic power elite. Ukraine thanks for the American Minister of Health.